Are you getting away this summer? Well, Airbnb unveiling its biggest platform redesign in a decade. Akiko Fujita here with the company's CEO, who had some fascinating comments, Akiko, regarding the future of the office. Can't wait to hear them.
Yeah, let's get right into it, Dave. We've got Brian Chesky here, the CEO of Airbnb. By the way, our very first studio guest since the pandemic. So it is great to have you here. I want to start with what's playing out in the markets. Can't ignore it. We have seen a significant sell-off in tech stocks. Airbnb alone down, more than 30% in the last month, 52-week low today. What do you think is going on?
Well, I primarily would just say that I, as a CEO, try to focus on what I can control. And so I try to limit how much I talk about what's going on in the markets. But I think that obviously this is like a correction that I haven't probably seen since I came into Silicon Valley in 2008. And maybe it's more profound than the changes that we've seen in 2008. I started Airbnb with my friends, and we really got going like in 2008. 2009, we joined Y Combinator. The economy was so bad that I remember Paul Graham saying there might be no investors at demo day. And what I tell people is this might be the end of a moment, but there's always the next moment. If you're building something important, you just keep building and you wait for the next moment.
You say worse than 2008 potentially. Why?
Well, potentially for tech. I mean, I don't recall how much tech stocks were down in 2008. But the fundraising environment was pretty chilled in 2008. But a lot of investors and people that I respect are saying this is more like June 2000. But I was in college back then, and so I have no recollection really of the dot-com crash. I wasn't really paying attention to tech back then.
You think this is ultimately a good thing? There's a bit of a shakedown happening. There's been a lot of money floating around, not just in the public markets, but in the private markets as well. Is there a bit of shakedown that was needed?
I don't want to say it's a good thing because I think it's kind of like overeating could kill you and undereating can kill you. And the same thing with funding. I think that startups generally raise too much money. They spend too much money. I think having too much money perpetuates ideas that aren't maybe meant to be perpetuated, and you can pursue strategies for too long. At the same time, that doesn't mean that like a investment nuclear winter is good either. Mm-hmm. And I think that this is going to be causing a lot of pain and suffering. So I'm not going to say that's a good thing. But I do think that some of the best companies are born in recessions. They're born in crisis. And I think that adversity will make great companies better if they can make it through.
We've seen a lot of companies slowing some of their hiring, in some cases freezing. Yep. Uber CEO Derek Khosrowshahi recently came out and said there is a seismic shift that's happening in investor sentiment. They have to be a leaner company. How does this change the way Airbnb operates? Have you seen that shift from your investors?
We're going to step on the gas. Like now, we're going to go even harder. I mean, why would the stock price affect how we run the company? Like we went through an incredibly intense period in 2000. We lost 80% of our business in 8 weeks. And the reason we did a layoff is because we're actually burning a huge amount of free cash flow. We were burning a lot of cash. And so we had to right-size our business. We had to get really focused. In Q1, we generated $1.2 billion of free cash flow. The company is financially stronger than it's ever been before. More people are going to travel this summer than we think we've ever seen. We just rolled out the biggest update to our app in a decade. So we are absolutely stepping on the gas. And I think the ultimate way to look at the strength of a company is to look at the strength of our financials. And we're very strong. And so we're going to run the company based on our inputs, the things we can control. And we can control our product. We can control our financials to some extent. The stock price we actually can't completely control, especially when it's things that are very sector oriented.
Let's talk about that revamp.
Yeah.
The largest revamp in a decade. What prompted it?
What prompted it is the pandemic changed the world. The pandemic changed the way we work. People aren't going back to an office, most people, 5 days a week. And if you don't have to go back to an office 5 days a week, it means you have incremental flexibility. And so suddenly millions of people can travel more places, they can work more places, and many of them are working and living in Airbnbs. And we realized, the world's changed, but the way people search for travel hasn't. Because for most travel websites for 25 years, there's a search box. And they ask you to type a place into the search box. We did that too. And the problem is people only type in like the 10, 20 places they can think of. And we wonder why everyone goes to the same cities. And we thought Airbnb's in 100,000 locations. What if we allowed you to search not just by the places you could think of, but you could discover like based on your passions, your interest. And so we launched Airbnb Categories. We have 4.4 million homes that are categorized in 56 different collections. We have a castles category, a golfing category, a vineyard category, a national parks category. Really, there's a category for everyone. And we think this is a whole new way to search and discover a world of possibilities. And we think the pandemic has created a shift, the biggest change in travel since World War II. And we think people are ready for a new way to travel.
The OMG category.
Yes.
What was the most interesting to me? Because you're looking at buildings that are like different shape, right? These aren't just homes.
There's like a building that's like a actual snake, and there's like little cabooses, and there's there's pretty incredible things. Like there's a yellow submarine in the forest in New Zealand. It's just, we were even trying to think of, well, what do you call this category?
Yeah.
And like somebody just said, oh my God, I can't believe these exist. And I said, there you go.
There's the
name.
category right there.
And I think there's a really interesting lesson here, which is that Airbnb is limited to people's imagination. And also, people don't just want to stay in the same kinds of spaces as they did before. People want something unique. They want to have an experience. They want to do something they can remember. And Airbnb is a really good way, obviously, to do that, especially things like the OMG category.
Let me ask you about the travel outlook, because I know in your most recent earnings call, you talked about the strong bookings you've gotten for summer all the way out to Q4. And yet today we got some data that pointed to U.S. airline bookings dropping 17%. Yesterday we saw data that showed airline tickets are up 18%. How do you think that's going to affect Airbnb?
It might, if fewer people fly, then my presumption is fewer people cross the border. And so we'll have, in that environment, more domestic travel, which is what we saw the last 2 years, actually. So in 2020, we were able to rebound faster than any other company in any other travel company, to my knowledge. And the reason why is because people weren't traveling for business, they weren't crossing borders, they weren't going to tourist destinations, they were getting in cars, driving about a tank of gas to a home they would stay in with friends and family on Airbnb. So I think the key thing is we have a really resilient model. How we have nearly every type of space at nearly every price point in nearly every community in nearly every country in the world. However travel changes, luckily we have a community that can adapt and be pretty resilient. So it may change the mix shift, but it doesn't really, I don't anticipate changes in our outlook.
Finally, I have to ask you about an internal change that's happened. You recently announced that all employees for Airbnb can work and live anywhere. Now, you've got, what, 6,000 employees
6,
roughly, but you said you had a surge in your jobs page. More than 1 million people?
Yeah, so we announced on April 28th that Airbnb employees can now live and work anywhere. In fact, you can go to 170 different countries and go for 90 days of time in each country. And if you move anywhere in the country you work and you have authorization to work, we're not going to lower your pay. So if you live in San Francisco and you want to go move to Iowa, you're going to get the same salary. We're not going to dock your pay. Since we made that announcement, more than 1 million people visited our jobs and careers page. And I think what that says to me is this is what people want.
Future of work, no more office space, right? We're sitting in a building with an office space.
Not as much. I don't think offices will go away, but I think the office as we know it is going to go away. This is just a sign of things to come. People will always want to be together. People don't want to only be on Zoom. They don't want to only be remote. But just because they want to be together doesn't mean they want to be in an office 3 days a week.
I'd be curious to see how many of those 6,000 employees actually move abroad. But Brian Chesky, good to have you in studio.
Well, thank you for having me today.
Thank you so much for joining us. Rochelle, I'll toss it back to you.
All right. I mean, fantastic stuff. You had me at Castle. I mean, when I'm thinking of places that I'm going to Airbnb, this has expanded my horizons.